have come with such a big load of enlightening information in PowerPoint. Now, it's the easiest talk I moderate because I only waffle for 3 minutes and then you do the rest. I can doze off. Of course, I wouldn't, right? Okay, 請阿 Mark 講講今年佢呢部新作。
唔好意思，明年講廣東話，但係今年用英文好冇？麻煩你。Okay. First, I want to thank very much the invitation from the TDC and their very good staff who have arranged everything very smoothly. And I also want to thank very much Tao Laoshi for coming today. And his schedule is extremely busy, but he finds the time to come each year to our book presentation. And you can see from the audience that Tao Laoshi is very popular. If only me invite you, there will only be my mother-in-law, the family dog, the family cat, possibly my tai-tai. But with Tao Laoshi, we always have a very big audience. Now, I want to just say briefly why I write this book. Now, I've been working in China for about 40 years, and during this time I meet many remarkable Jewish characters, and you will see many of them in my presentation. So that is what inspired me to write the book. But you know very well, Jewish people are extremely intelligent. The Jewish scholarship is very high level, especially writing about themselves. So in writing my book, I became a bit nervous because, unfortunately, I'm not Jewish. I'm what you call a goy. Goy means a Gentile. I'm not Jewish. So I thought, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm a foolish goyim. So I asked many Jewish people to help me with this book. So when I make interview, I send the text of the interview to the person I interview, ask them to correct it and send back to me. And then I found 2 professors from Israel, one in Jerusalem, one in Harbin. He is the only Jewish resident of Harbin since 2002. He lived for 16 years in Harbin with his Harbin tai-tai. He's the only Jewish person there. Now, these 2 Israeli professors, I never met them. We only communicate via the email. And I start by asking them 1 or 2 questions, some dates, some names, and they were very friendly, replied very quickly. So I said, well, do you mind, can I send you the whole chapter to read? So I sent them the whole chapter, and they sent back with many corrections. This you did not write enough about. They sent me some new material. So altogether, 7 of the chapters were corrected by these 2 professors. And they gave me a lot of new material that I knew nothing about before. So I just want to say, first, I want to thank publicly these 2 professors. One is Professor Yitzhak Shichor from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and the other is Professor Ben Canaan of Harbin for their great contribution to this book. Okay? So, let us start. This is the quote I got from one of the rabbis of Hong Kong. There are several rabbis of Hong Kong. They're all very eminent people. And I was interviewing this one, Rabbi Ozer, and I asked him, can you summarize the history of the Jewish people in China? And this was his answer. And I think you can understand, if you read it, what he means to say. The Jewish history in Europe, in Russia, in the Middle East, is often very tragic. It's exile, persecution, and as we know during the Holocaust, it's execution on a mass level. But the Jewish experience in China has been very positive. The Jewish people in China never experienced the discrimination, the persecution in China as they did in Europe and in other countries. So this is the meaning of the rabbi's quote. And I think it kind of summarizes our book. It's a good news book. It's a story of good news of the Jewish people in China. So now I want to show you some buildings, some Jewish buildings in China, and see if you can guess where they are. Can anyone tell me which city we are in now? Very good. This is the great synagogue of Kaifeng. And at the biggest extent, it was 10,000 square meters. It was so large. So it was the largest settled Jewish community in China in the pre-modern era. What city are we in now? That's right. This was the largest synagogue built in Harbin about 100 years ago. What city are we in now? Right. So if you go to Harbin today, this is what you will see. Because due to the efforts of this Professor Ben Canaan that I mentioned, he has persuaded the city government that they should restore their Jewish heritage. And they have rebuilt this synagogue. Now, there's only one Jewish person there, so it's not used anymore as a synagogue, but it's been reconstructed in the way that it was. And this is a great contribution that the professor has made to Harbin. I think you all know this building. Where is this building? That's right, Robinson Road. So this is the only standing synagogue actually in the whole of China. I mean, in mainland China now, there are many Jewish congregations. They have religious services, but they do not have an independent synagogue building. So this is the only one. Now, in Hong Kong also, there are many Jewish congregations, and they have services in offices and in apartments, but this is the only one which is built as a synagogue and is still functioning in this way. I'm sure you know this person. Anybody? This is Rabbi Oser, the man I quote from in the beginning, and he is the rabbi of this Olalea synagogue in Robinson Road, and he was extremely helpful to us in writing this book. So, the Jewish people first arrive in China in the Tang Dynasty. Why do they come to China then? Well, it's the same reason that many people in the world go to New York or go to London, because it was the most prosperous country in the world then, and the capital of the Tang Dynasty was the world's most prosperous city. So it had many, many foreigners living there from many different countries, and Jewish merchants were among them. And they arrived, and they started to do mostly export business. They would buy Chinese products and export them abroad. And the big difference between China and Europe was that the Chinese public and the Chinese government accepted them, allowed them to live a normal life, did not put them in a ghetto or separate areas. They could join the Chinese government, they could join the Chinese military, they could work in finance, they could become farmers. And this is what they did. The Jewish people did many different kinds of work. They were not separated from the Chinese. They learned to speak Mandarin. Some of them married Chinese ladies. And they used Hebrew only for the religious purposes. So the problem is that China was too good to them. You know, 同化. They were assimilated. Now, you know, to be Jewish, you must continue the traditions, the character, the culture, the language of your ancestors. You must not assimilate. But this is what happened to them in China. So as the centuries went along, they became more and more Sinified, and they lost links with the Jewish communities in other parts of the world. And as we know, in the 19th century, there were many disasters in China. There were natural disasters, there were wars, and so on. And the great synagogue in Kaifeng was destroyed in a flood. There was no money to rebuild it. There was no rabbi. So when the new government took power in 1949, this is what they said. There are no Jews in Kaifeng. That was the official verdict. And in China, you know, there are only 5 official religions. What are they? Only 5. So Protestant, Catholic, Buddhist, Islam, Taoism. Now, Judaism is the oldest religion in the world. So from the point of view of a Westerner, it is incredible that someone can say Judaism is not a religion, but this was the judgment in 1949, okay? So now we have 5 ladies. Now, can anyone tell me where this picture was taken? And what is behind the ladies? Yes. So these ladies said they were the descendants of the Jews of Kaifeng. And they wished to emigrate to Israel, which is the right of all Jewish people. And this was a very difficult procedure. The government of Israel is quite suspicious because they think many people want to go to Israel because it's a very prosperous country with a high standard of living. And you have to produce all kinds of documents to show that you are genuinely have a Jewish background. Anyway, these 5 ladies, they succeeded. So they arrived in February 2016, and they made Aliyah, that's the term, which means going upwards, going to the mountain. And from Kaifeng, there are 19 people who have done this. And this is a very sensitive matter with the PRC government. They don't like this. The PRC government is very generous to the Jewish people in China who have come from America, from Europe, I mean, Guilo like me. But they don't want there to be Chinese Jews. So this is quite a controversial issue, but 19 people have done this. But when they arrive in Israel, they can't just step off the plane and start work the next day. No, they have to prove their Jewish credentials. So these 5 ladies, they immediately went taken to a theological seminary in Jerusalem, and they have to spend several years learning Hebrew, learning Jewish culture and history, and then they have to pass an exam by the chief rabbinate of Israel before they can become Jews and therefore become Israeli citizens. Okay. So now that's all on the Kaifeng Jews. So now we're moving to another city which has a great Jewish history in China, which is Shanghai is one, and this is the other one, in the north. North, further. Harbin, right. China and Tsarist Russia signed an agreement to build what we call the China Eastern Railway from Chita in Siberia to Vladivostok. And the capital of this railway was Harbin. So many Russians emigrated from Russia to Harbin, and many Jews also went there because they had a much better standard of life and more freedoms in Harbin than they had in Russia, less persecution. So this is a photograph of a Jewish family in Harbin. You can see it's very prosperous, and there's the Chinese servant at the back. They had several newspapers in Harbin, and because they came from Russia, the newspapers were in Russian. And can you tell me who is in the photograph? He's a very famous person in Israel. Theodor Herzl. He is the father of Zionism. So this is an article about him, and there was a strong Zionist movement in Harbin. On the left is a photo of some Jewish people in the fur business, because, you know, Manchuria had a thriving fur business. So they would buy the pelts from the animals, and they would turn the pelts into coats, and it was a very lucrative business. And the photo on the right is the inside of the big synagogue we had at the beginning. Now this is the photograph of the old people's home for Jewish people in Harbin. So that is to say, if you were elderly, you had no children to look after you, you didn't have enough money, you could go and live there. So this tells us how settled was the Jewish community there, that they would have such an institution. So we call Harbin the capital of Jewish Manchuria. So up to 25,000 Jewish people there. They ran businesses, factories, trading firms, banks, hotels, and they had a complete social life. Schools, synagogues, hospitals, academies. It was a very flourishing community. And we call Harbin the Shanghai of the North because it was in China, but it was not in China. It was like Shanghai. It was governed by the Russians. It had no taxes. So you can see it was a huge trading center. This small city had 4,700 trading firms. They traded with 100 countries around the world. This is really extraordinary. Then, September 1931, the Japanese invade Manchuria, take over. And that is the end of Harbin as an international city, because the Japanese want to take over many of the businesses which the Jewish people and other foreigners were involved with. So many Jewish people then leave Harbin and move to Tianjin or Shanghai or other cities in China. Now this is the synagogue, the cemetery for the Jewish people in Harbin. Initially there were 3 cemeteries, and after 49 they were not well cared for. Some of the tombstones were stolen. But in recent years the city government has made a new one and moved many of the tombs to this new one. So if you visit Harbin now, you can visit this cemetery. On the left is the photograph, an advertisement for this hotel, Hotel Moderne. It's still standing in Harbin. You can stay there. And in the book, we have a very dramatic story about this hotel, so I won't spoil it. You have to buy the book to find out. On the left side, I want to show you a picture of Professor Ben Canaan. There he is. And he is discussing with the city government how to restore these former Jewish buildings. So I want to put the photograph in just so I can say thank you to him. Okay? So now we go to another city. Which city are we in now? And what's this building? I'm sure you've seen it. Jinjiang Fandian. 去过了吗? I mean, this is the Chinese name, Jinjiang Fandian, but its name before was Grosvenor House, and that's still the English name, Grosvenor House, and it was built as a very upmarket apartment block, and that is still its function today. When we were in Shanghai, we used to visit there. It's very, very magnificent. It has very big rooms. It has a lift. It has rooms for servants, because now the rich Chinese, the rich foreigners in Shanghai, they all have servants. So there's rooms to put your servant. And it has remained a very high-class apartment building. And this was built by the richest Jewish person in Shanghai. Can you tell me his name? Yeah, it could be, but another man a little more rich. It's Victor Sassoon. He built many buildings, but this is one of them. And when Nixon came in '72, he stayed in this building. So here he is, Sir Victor Sassoon. And why do you think I choose this picture? I mean, Sir Victor had many interests in life. Yes, well, one of them was ladies. And he didn't marry until very late. So he had many lady friends. So I just wanted to show you, this is a very typical picture of Sir Victor. Now, this is the photograph of the other very wealthy Jewish entrepreneur, and his name is Silas Hardoon. And he's quite different. He married the lady on the left, and she is a Eurasian, half European, half Chinese, and she's a devout Buddhist. So when he married her, there was a lot of opposition from his community, because they thought he ought to marry a Jewish lady. But no, he married her. And he became extremely wealthy. And he put his money into property. And Nanjing Donglu is his creation. So most of the buildings on both sides of Nanjing Donglu were built by him. And then he rented them out. And he made it the most prosperous shopping street in China. So the rents just went through the roof. And I think it's still today in Shanghai, it's the main shopping street. So he and Sassoon were quite similar. They started by making a fortune out of opium. And when opium became illegal, they moved the money out of opium and they moved it into property. And that was not quite as profitable as opium, but it was extremely profitable. Because 1920s and 30s, Shanghai became the richest, the most prosperous city in East Asia. And with his money, Mr. Hardoon created the largest private residence in Shanghai, enormous area, and his wife put there a Buddhist college inside this enormous garden. And she invited Buddhist monks to come. They had a Buddhist school. And this is part of the Buddhist area of this garden. Now, Silas Hardoon was not very observant as a Jew, but he donated money on the left to build this synagogue. It's not standing anymore, but as you can see, it was a very imposing building, 1920s. And during World War II, this synagogue was the home of the Mir Yeshiva. Yeshiva means religious school. And the members of the Mir Yeshiva escaped from Poland and arrived in Shanghai, and they spent the war in this synagogue studying the Torah. And this is a miracle. They are the only yeshiva which escaped from Occupy Europe. All the members, both the rabbis and the students, all were able to escape, and they spent the war in Shanghai, and after the war they went to Israel, they went to United States. So this is a really miraculous photograph here. Now, there were 7 synagogues in Shanghai, and this was the largest one, and this was built with the money of Sir Victor Sassoon. And this building is still standing, and it belongs now to the city education department. And they allow the Jewish community to use it sometimes, but they won't give it back to them. So if you want to ask in the question time about that, I'll be happy to explain. So now we're in 1930s. Hitler has come to power in Nazi Germany, and the Jewish people are nervous about the future. So this is a photo taken quite early after Hitler took power. So these people were able to leave Germany in the normal way. That is to say, they were able to buy a ticket on a ship, and were able to go and take the ship and arrive in Shanghai because they were afraid of the future. The numbers began to increase. There wasn't enough space for them in Shanghai, so they have to make all these bunk beds. Now, this is the photograph we put on the front page, and these are members of the Refuge, which is a very powerful religious institution in Judaism. And I want to thank very much Refuge for allowing us to use this photograph. And this is the photo we put on the front page. And on the front page, you can't have a caption. So why do I choose this photo for the front page? Remember, I can't have a caption explaining it. So why do I choose this one? Because they're evidently Jewish people, and you can see from the back we have characters, so we're in China. So the picture tells us these are Jewish people in China. So they are arriving, they've just got off the ship in Shanghai, and they are just walking from the ship to their lodgings. So during World War II, Shanghai became a place of refuge for about 25 to 30,000 Jewish people. And this is really an extraordinary story. This is really a miracle. Because as you know, Hitler occupied the whole of continental Europe, and there was nowhere for Jewish people to hide legally. And yet, 25 to 30,000 were able to come this enormous distance from Europe to Shanghai, and they were not able to stay in the countries en route. The British would not allow them to stay in their colonies. So they had to, this was the only place that they could come. In December 1941, the Japanese conquered the whole of Shanghai. July 1942, the Gestapo representative in Tokyo came to Shanghai and said, okay, now you're in charge of Shanghai. We have 30,000 Jewish people here. Now is the moment for the final solution. And he gave them 3 methods to eliminate all the Jews of Shanghai. But the Japanese refused to do it. So while some Jewish people died during the war of different causes, they didn't die because they were executed by the Japanese. If you would like to discuss this more in the questions, I would be happy to do it. So you may ask, how is it they got from Europe to Shanghai? Well, a major reason was several individual diplomats issued them visas. And this is one of them. He's called He Fengshan, and he was 中华民国驻维也纳的领事. And he understood very well what was going on. He saw what was going on around him. He found it completely intolerable. So he started to issue visas. And then his boss in Berlin said, you must stop issuing the visas. We don't want these people in China anymore. But he disregarded the order, and he continued to issue the visas. The Nazis closed the consulate. So he moved to his apartment and continued to issue the visas. The Gestapo come to his house. They tried to arrest a Jewish person in the house. He said, you can't do it. I've given him a visa. And if you have a visa, you can leave. They couldn't stop you leaving if you have a visa. So this Mr. He is what we call righteous among the nations. He's honored in this Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem because of what he did. And here's one of the visas he issued, and this is the lady who received the visa, and thanks to him, she was able to escape, and she remained alive, and her family and her children, her grandchildren, survived. Now, this is another diplomat who did it. This is a Japanese called Chuene Sugihara. He was the vice consul in Kaunas in Lithuania, and one morning at 6 o'clock, he got up, and he opened his curtain, and on the left is what he saw. He took a photograph. These are Jewish people, and they cannot get a visa for anywhere. So the Japan embassy is the last one. So he's like Mr. He. He's so moved by this that he started to issue the visas. Tokyo say, don't issue the visas. We don't want these people. But he continued to issue the visas. And even to the time that he was forced to leave Kaunas, he took the train to Berlin. He was handing out the visas through the window of the railway train. So here's a photo of Mr. Sugihara speaking to some Nazi officers at a dinner. Now this is another diplomat, and I'm quite pleased about this because when I speak to Jewish scholars and professors, they don't know about this man. His name is Wang Tifu. He was a diplomat of Manzhouguo in Berlin. He worked in the consulate of Manzhouguo in Berlin. He could speak German. He's one of the very few Chinese who met Hitler. He talked to Hitler. And in this book, which he dictated to a Chinese author, he described going to this enormous chancellery which Hitler built, and he describes events in which he took part where Hitler was present and Hitler was speaking. And this is really extraordinary testimony, I've never read a book like this. So he was the same. He also issued many visas to Jewish people to escape.
What's the name of his book?
Just Wang Tifu Zhuan. Okay? Now, this man was not a diplomat. He was a Japanese professor called Ketsuji Setsuzo. Now, he has a very extraordinary life, too. He was initially a Protestant minister. He studied in California. He returned to Japan. He became more and more interested in Judaism. He learned Hebrew. He was the only Japanese in the 1930s who could read and speak Hebrew. Then he was hired by the South Manchurian Railway to be the advisor on Jewish affairs. So he moved to Dalian. And he spent a lot of time in Harbin, and he became to know many Jewish people, especially rabbis. And he became so influenced by them that at the end of his life, he went to Jerusalem. He had the circumcision in an Orthodox hospital, and he became himself Orthodox Jew, and he died there, and he is buried in the Mount of Olives. So during the war, he helped very much the Jewish people in Japan, because among the Japanese military and the Japanese officialdom, there were some people who were fascist and against Jews. So he worked very hard to protect them. So now the war is over. And as you know, after the war, China was afflicted by civil war, inflation, the communists take power. So there's no place anymore for the Jews. So both the refugees and the long-term residents, they left, and they went to America, Israel, Canada, Australia, countries all over the world. Very few of them stayed, just a few. And in my book, you can read profiles of these 3 or 4 who were friends of the Communist Party, and they stayed and they gave their life in China. So let's have a final photograph of Sir Victor Sassoon. He left China, but he didn't go to Israel or United States. He went to Bahamas. Now, why did he go to Bahamas? What's good about Bahamas? Good climate, horse racing, no communists, and no taxes. So finally, very close to the end of his life, he did marry. So this lady was his nurse, his American nurse. So finally, he did marry right at the end. But he kept it, he delayed it as long as possible, Now, can you tell me what this house is? I'm sure some of you have been there. Shanghai 那个延安西路. Yeah, this was the house of the Kaduri family. It was a magnificent residence. It was called Marble Hall because all the floors were marble. And after 1949, the Kaduri family gave it to the new government. So now it is a center for youth activities. So if you go to Shanghai now, you can still see it. It looks like that, and it has this wonderful garden in the front. Now, just like all the other foreigners and the overseas Chinese and the rich businessmen, the Jews of China try to get their money out before the communists take power. So Sir Victor was the smartest one, and he started doing this in the 1930s. And I think he got out more than most people. For instance, after 1945, if you rented his apartments in Shanghai, you could not pay in Chinese money. You had to pay in Hong Kong dollar, American dollar, or English sterling, and you had to pay in Hong Kong. So already, he was way ahead of the game. So, Israel is born in 1948. Now, Zhonghua Minguo, Republic of China, was a long-term supporter of Israel. 1 year after Balfour Declaration, the ROC government issued a statement in support of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Sun Yat-sen wrote a letter of support to the Jewish Association of Shanghai. In the key vote in November 1947, the ROC did not vote against the establishment of Israel. She recognized it in March, and she voted to admit it to United Nations. So these are very important steps. As you know, in those years, the situation of Israel was extremely perilous. It was extremely weak. So she needed all the support that she could get, and the ROC provided it. But the PRC was different. As you know, Mao Zedong was a revolutionary. He supported the Islamic revolutionary causes, so he would not recognize Israel. Israel recognized PRC, but not the other way around. You can't have marriage with only one person, So this is a man called Shaul Eisenberg. I think you probably don't know him. Anyway, he was the pioneer of the trade between Israel and China at a time when there was no diplomatic relations. And he actually moved to Beijing. He had an apartment, and he lived there near the Beijing airport, and he had an office in Beijing. And I was lucky enough to know some of the people who worked in his office. So they told me all about what he was up to. And he organized the first delegation from the Israeli arms industry to China in 1979, and they flew in his private plane. And he was very secretive. He would not meet journalists, but luckily I was able to have a meeting with him once because a Chinese reporter invited me. And he wouldn't talk about his business, but he would talk about himself. He's from Polish origin. He was born in Munich. He escaped on a boat in Rotterdam, 1938. He came to Shanghai on his own. His parents, family remain in Europe. He spent the war in Shanghai and in Japan. His wife is half Japanese, half Austrian. So he had a great fondness for both Japan and China, and he said they helped us, both countries helped us during the war. So he became like an international businessman, an international middleman, and he was the pioneer of the business of trade between Israel and China at a time when it was politically very difficult. So, because of him, China became the largest export market of the Israeli arms industry for a certain period. Now, this is a slightly trickier question. What city are we in now? We're not in mainland anymore. We're in, Shuangxi. This is the great military parade, every 10月10号. So this Dongfang Daodan is also made with Israeli technology. So this is really beyond our comprehension. They were able to sell lots of arms to the PRC, and they also can sell a lot of arms to ROC as well. And if you read my book, you will find out that the Taiwan nuclear industry was created by an Israeli scientist. And this I really couldn't imagine, but my friend in Jerusalem, he sent me all this information, and I put it all in the book. It's a really extraordinary story. And the ROC nearly had nuclear weapon. After Mao exploded the nuclear bomb in 1964, Chiang Kai-shek became very afraid that he would use it. So he said, we must also develop our own nuclear weapon. So I won't spoil the story, but if you read the book, you'll explain how close the ROC came to developing its own nuclear weapon. So finally, in 1992, we have the normalization. And since then, the relations have developed very rapidly, especially in the last 5 years, in the business field, trade, investment, tourism, cultural. Things have moved very, very rapidly. China is now a big investor in Israel. But the Israelis are a little bit angry that there is no what they call peace dividend. China is a very big diplomatic power in the world now. But she doesn't use this power to broker a peace deal. Now, maybe a peace deal is impossible, but China doesn't expand efforts in this regard. So some people in Israel are a bit critical, and China is a big exporter of arms to countries like Syria, Yemen, and Iran, which hate Israel. Iran, wants to obliterate Israel altogether. So, of course, this upsets Israel a lot. Now, who do we recognize in this photograph? You should recognize two people.
右邊第二個，右邊第二個。
Li Ka-shing and one more. One Israeli man in the middle. Shimon Peres, he was president. So this is a new joint venture high-tech college in Shantou University that was built between Shantou University and Technion. Technion is the MIT of Israel. And this was made possible because Mr. Li Ka-shing donated $130 million to Technion. It's the largest donation it ever received. And as the counterparty, they agreed to build this joint venture high-tech college in Shantou University. And Mr. Li was one of the earliest Chinese investors in Israel. He put a lot of money into startups, and one of them is called Waze. I don't know if you know it. Anyway, Waze went to market, listed, and Mr. Li made $143 million from the listing. He'd held the shares, I think, less than 2 years. So what he did was he gave most of this money to Technion. He also have other investments in Israel, and this is the biggest desalination plant in Israel, and this also belongs to one of Mr. Li's companies. Okay. So we're nearly finished. Now I would just want to show you some images of the most famous Jewish people in China who have had the biggest impact on China. So please have a guess. Who's number one? Thank you. Very good. Here he is. Now, if Mr. Marx was with us today and we asked him about what China is up to now, I think he might be a bit confused, not able to. But anyway, his parents were, his father was a rabbi, his grandfather was a rabbi. His father wished for him to become a rabbi, but instead, unfortunately, he became revolutionary. Yeah. And who's this? Yes. When I meet people in the mainland, and I say, 谁是犹太人? They always mention his name, and they also say, 我很想我的孩子，我的儿子，跟他一样. So he is a sort of image of brilliance, okay? And who's this? Yes. Now, my father was a psychiatrist, and he was a disciple of Sigmund Freud, so I want to include him. But in Shanghai, one day I interviewed this lady. She was a psychiatrist at one of the big universities. And she said, he is the father of psychiatry in China. But she said it's very difficult because he talks a lot about human sexuality. And she said it's very difficult for Chinese people or even Chinese intellectuals to speak about this subject. But she said he is the father of psychiatry in China. So I put him in this. Yes. Now, there are many people who cause the normalization between the PRC and the USA, but I would say Mr. Kissinger is one of the most important. And I suggest in my book that because he was Jewish, because of his own very unusual life and experience, he was born in Germany and then his family emigrated to the United States. And then during the war, he went back to Germany in the US Army and was in charge of a town. He had experiences which other American officials didn't have. So I think this gave him tools and ability to understand situations and explain to Mr. Nixon why it was needed to normalize with the PRC. Finally, I just want to put, this is my professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Professor Yitzhak Shichor, and I just want to put his photo in just to say thank you to him in front of all of you, because thanks to him, my book is as it is. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you for filling in so many holes with such colorful pieces of jigsaw. This is the sort of stuff that is never taught in Hong Kong's secondary school, because things or people are seen in black and white, right? When you talk about Manchu War in Manchuria, everyone there was a bad guy, instead of having an angel like that, right? An angelic ambassador of the Japanese occupied Manchu War in Germany, was it, right? But you've missed out one very important Jewish name related or associated with Hong Kong. What about the name of the road in Kowloon that stretches all the way from TST to Sam Shui Po, right? Yeah, yes. Nathan Road.
Yeah, no, we have a section on Sir Matthew Nathan. He was the only Jewish governor of Hong Kong, and what is remarkable about him is that in the British Empire, a Jewish person could advance. He could become governor of Hong Kong, then he had other senior positions. His brothers also had senior positions in the British military and in the civil service. And he was here in Hong Kong at the same moment as the Dreyfus trial in Paris. Do you know about that? This was a French army officer who was wrongfully accused of selling secrets to the Germans, and he was found guilty, and he was sentenced to penal servitude in Guyana, in South America. And Theodore Herzl, do you remember the photo of him in the Harbin newspaper? He was a journalist. He saw this trial in Paris, and he said, France is the country of the French Revolution, of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And if in this country a Jewish army officer can be falsely accused and sent to prison, we, the Jews, we have no future in Europe. And we have to have our own homeland. So he wrote Die Judenstadt, the Jewish state, because of what he saw at the Dreyfus trial. So that was the same moment that Sir Matthew Nathan was governor here. So I just want to show up how the British were much smarter than the French and promoted
Yes.
Jewish people, not only in civil service, but in many fields.
At the same time.
And it was a great asset to Britain. And it was a great loss to France, and of course, an even greater loss to Germany, the way they treated them.
So Governor Nathan must have read from newspaper in Hong Kong about the Dreyfus affairs, right?
But Sir Matthew was not completely accepted here, of course, because he was Jewish, so he could not go to the Sunday service at the Anglican Cathedral. And of course, that was where the British elite would meet. And of course, he could not also join the Hong Kong Club either. So if they had social events...
Really? I thought any governor would automatically...
So, I mean, he was accepted like 98%, but not 100%. But overall, no, of course, he was accepted, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't know that, right? So, 個彌敦呢係猶太人. Was he the only Jewish governor in the history of colonial Hong Kong?
Well, there were 8 Irish governors in Hong Kong.
Wow.
So the British were quite smart. I mean,
So
they handed out
very
the prizes, you know, not only to
very
their own
smart.
people. Yes.
But unfortunately, in the eyes of Hong Kong Chinese, all Guailos are the same, were the same. We could not distinguish.
Well, for me, all Chinese are different. That's right.
We would never understand there's some, or there were, or there are still some Guailos who hate the British Guailo. Perhaps you being one of them, as Irish. You can say that safely now, right? Perhaps I will compare with 20 years ago. 嗰個 Dreyfus 咧係嗰陣時嗰個喺法國有一個猶太人軍官咧，俾人話叛國，係大約係19世紀末20世紀初係好大件事，係俾人屈。咁嗰陣時有一個作家叫做佐拉 Zola，right？ He wrote a long article， 佢咧就幫佢就話叫我控訴嚇，就係咧就變咗係一個法國嘅小説家係去對抗成個法國嘅民意同埋司法，就話支持呢個猶太軍官，話佢係冇罪。所以呢個亦都係成個即係喺現代知識分子嗰個抗爭啊，即係嗰個關懷嗰個弱勢族群啊，嗰個傳統嘅繼承，因為嗰陣時19世紀末，同埋開啓20世紀咧，嗰啲知識分子要為嗰啲基層啊弱勢嘅人嘅嗰個爭取，係嘛？Wow, I mean, we didn't know at that time Hong Kong, France, or the Jewish. We all lived already in a mini globalized world, right, at that time. So one question from me, that Sassoon, was it the same one as the name of the road now, near Queen Mary's Hospital?
Yes, because the
Sassoon-do.
Sir Victor was in Shanghai, but he was the head of a global business empire. So many of the Sassoon children went to study in Britain. They went to these expensive private schools. One of the founders of the Royal Air Force was a Sassoon. One of the most famous poets of the First World War was a Sassoon.
Was he related to the Sassoon family in Shanghai?
And the current president of the China-Britain Business Council, he's Lord Sassoon.
Oh.
So,
or in the same family? Related.
For me, it's stupid to say the Jews are smart, but
Yes.
They succeed in China. The PRC comes. It's time to leave. They move to the UK and they prosper there too. So admirable. Yeah. Please.
一腳踏兩三條船啊。Okay. Any
questions,
question?
please?
Yes.
我想問點解嗰個 final solution 咧喺上海冇執行到咧
Because the Japanese were not as bad as the Germans during the worst time of human history of atrocities, perhaps. But
well, Tai and I were lucky to live in Japan for nearly 4 years. And if you go to Japanese bookshops, you will find some books on the Jews, and they all say they are the chosen race. Why are they so smart? in music, in academics, in medicine, technology, why they're so smart. So the Japanese view of Jews and the Chinese view of Jews is very much the same, very positive. It is the opposite of that in Europe, of the history of persecution and segregation. Not only that, but if you read in my book, there were several senior officers in the intelligence bureau of the Guangdong army in Manchuria who said we must have a Jewish homeland in Manchuria. It's called the Fugu Plan, because they saw that the Nazis were expelling the Jews, and they thought these Jews are very good immigrants. They are very talented, they've got capital, they've got very good connections, they've got a lot of skills. Let us give them space in Manchuria for them to build a homeland. So they wanted to encourage the Jews to come there. Not only that, but the Zhonghua Mingguo Zhengfu had the same idea. They proposed a Jewish homeland in Yunnan. They saw the same thing going on. They said, these are very good migrants, let's have them. So, unfortunately, neither of these homelands came into existence because of the events of the war. But the Japanese view of the Jews was very positive, and they saw them as a very good people. And, you know, what is the purpose of killing children, old people? I mean, what purpose does it serve? I mean, it's meaningless. I mean, there's no advantage whatever. So when we're in Shanghai, I interview a very eminent Chinese professor who is very knowledgeable on this topic. And we have a very interesting interview, and then we come to what I know is the most difficult question. And I say, 日本人有没有救犹太人的命? And Professor Wang think for a long time, and then give a very long answer, full of information. But he is a professor in the PRC. He cannot praise the Japanese during World War II. So let me tell you his answer to your question, okay? He said the Japanese had no humanitarianism. That's what he said. For them, it was a strategic question. They know the Jews are very influential in the United States. They know the Jews are powerful globally. Okay? They look at the war in the Soviet Union, Stalingrad. You remember the war in Stalingrad? It was the most, the battle with the most casualties in Soviet Union, and the first defeat of the Nazis. So he said, when the Russians realized that the Nazis had lost Stalingrad, they realized they have picked the wrong side in the war. So there is absolutely no motive to do what the Nazis want and kill the Jews, because we will just make things worse for ourselves. And then the Red Army in the Soviet Union pushed the Nazis back and gradually defeat them. So this Professor Wang said, but if the Nazis had won Stalingrad, had occupied Moscow, and conquered Soviet Union, what do you think the Japanese would have done to the Jews? That's what he said. So, I don't know. I'm afraid I'm inclined to be more sympathetic. As I say, from what we learned in Japan, the Japanese are very sympathetic and admiring of the Jews. So I see no reason why they should eliminate them. But really, that is the view of Professor Wang, and he's an expert. Okay?
This is very subtle brainwashing. You have to admit. It does make sense at the surface, right? I mean, it could have been one of the reasons. Who knows? 你聽唔聽佢話答你嗰個問題？佢話喺大陸嗰啲解放軍出身嘅，唔可以話日本人人道過納粹，只能夠話啲日本人係好功利。佢哋喺39年、40年就睇住，如果呢個德軍係打得贏，佔領到列寧格勒、史太林格勒嘅話，佢哋就買德國佬嗰邊，就會殺晒啲猶太人。但係因為打唔贏所以咧佢哋就留翻猶太人一條命。呢個係我認為係唔正確嘅。佢哋即係呢啲咁嘅政治行先嗰種反日嘅嗰種，但係咧 呢啲個係如果佢話如果呢個德軍可以佔領呢個打贏咗史太林格勒嘅話，日本人會殺猶太人。呢啲咁嘅假設咧 ，such hypothesis is very questionable。但係好多人會信㗎。你係如果咁就會咁，但係呢啲如果係冇發生，係嘛？
So if you visit Shanghai, you can visit the Shanghai Refugee Museum, which is where most of the Jewish refugees stayed in the war. And in this museum, you can see very much the view which Lao Shi has just described. I mean, it will present the PRC view, and there was a very infamous Japanese commandant of this segregated area where many Jewish people live, Mr. Goya. And he was a sadist. He was very bad to people.
I think it's much more simple. 其實好簡單，只有兩個理由。第一，有陣時日本人係好信呢啲優生學，佢哋眼中嘅猶太人嗰陣時已經有愛因斯坦，有咩嗰啲，佢哋覺得佢哋係叻人，係嘛？叻過亞洲人。但係見到希特拉去殺晒佢哋，哇！唔知點解會咁樣，冇希特拉個人咁癲，因為殺猶太人都係直情希特拉個人嘅狂想。第二就係日本同德國雖然係軸心國，但係佢哋唔係好似英美之間個關係咁密切。Right? Germany and Japan, they were not as close to each other as Britain and America. They didn't communicate with each other properly. So that the Japanese, when they bombed Pearl Harbor, they had not notified or told Hitler in advance. And when Hitler struck Russia, there had been no consultation with Japan beforehand either. 所以其實日本同埋德國咧叫做軸心國，唔係好密切嘅，即係你有你做，我有我做，我唔係一定會跟住你，唔係話即係我哋喺歷史書度睇嗰啲叫盟國，唔係咁樣。所以咧佢冇話跟足呢個德國咁樣咧係去殺啲猶太人。相反，蔣介石嘅國民黨嗰陣時同希特拉仲 friend 啲，因為咧直到1941年偷襲珍珠港，係嘛？同呢個納粹德國係有交往，包括嗰啲訓練嗰啲藍衣社嗰啲特務德國都教佢好多嗰啲軍事蔣百里全部係呢個德國咧有份教。所以嗰啲歷史嘅嘢唔係話非黑即白，唔係咁就係咁。中間咧，呢本書裏邊咧，佢有好多嗰啲黑白之間嗰啲唔同嗰啲顏色嗰啲層次就係我覺得唔係話哇！你嗰陣時個滿洲國。日本仔係咁衰，但係有個日本嘅大使，滿洲國嘅大使都係出於人道理由，同中華民國駐維也納嗰個大使都係一樣，唔係話因為佢哋係納粹或者係唔係因為日本軍國主義，又或者係中華民國嗰時日中之間打仗，都係出於一個人 ，right out of human nature split second that split second of humanity 係咁簡單嘅。但係我哋後來睇歷史就將嗰啲中國嘅歷史書就乜嘢將佢政治化，將個框框嗰度套嗰度。你係日本軍國主義，所以你嗰啲全部係衰人。呢啲係國民黨嗰陣時，呢啲又係衰人。延安嗰啲全部就係好人，唔係咁樣樣。你要承認每一個人喺嗰個處境之下都會有孔孟嗰種講惻隱之心突然間出嚟，唔理佢嗰陣時係東條英機嘅部下定係蔣介石定係咩 ？Right? Did I make sense? I hope. Right? 嗰位。
May I ask the technicalities of the return of Chinese Jews to Israel? Now, if you are, let's say, New York Jews with a Jewish grandparent, even if you're atheist, you could be accepted by the Israeli state. But Chinese Jews, because they've been assimilated for so long, it's hard to really be technically accepted by the rabbi in Israel as Jewish. So I understand that these returnees from Kaifeng is not strictly speaking Aliyah, but that they have to go through a conversion experience. to be accepted as Jewish. So it's a halfway house. It's not strictly Aliyah in a popular sense as if you were a New York Jew, even if you were atheist, but with a Jewish grandparent. Do I understand that correctly?
This is a very good question. I think this is a very complex question in Israel. Because as you know, when the Jews were expelled from the Holy Land, they went all over the world. You know, they went to Ethiopia, they went to India, they went to Southeast Asia, and they went also to China. So how do you prove you are a descendant of these lost tribes? So what happened in Kaifeng is that after the Geiger-Kaifeng policy, some Jewish, messianic organizations went to Kaifeng, and one in particular is called Shaveh, and they believe in reuniting the lost tribes of Israel around the world. So they went to Kaifeng and they looked for the lost Jews. So these 19 people stepped forward. And the Shaveh, the headquarters is in Jerusalem. They have very good connections with the government. They collected as many documents as possible, and they lobbied on behalf of the 19. So without Shaveh, they could not possibly have gone back to Israel. But you're quite right. Among the Jewish people in Israel, I think you will find many who would say these are not real Jews. Their mother is not Jewish. They did not speak Hebrew. They did not follow the religious rites. They lost them over the generations. So you're quite right. When they arrive in Israel, they must do intensive study, and they must be approved by the rabbinate before they become Jewish. But if you go to Shaveh's website, it says that the Jewish people in the world have a demographic crisis because so many of them are assimilated. You know, many Jewish people do not go to synagogue. Many Jewish people marry non-Jews. You know, and if the mother is not Jewish, the children are not Jewish. So they say that the real Jews in the world are shrinking. So our mission is to go around the world and find Jews in Russia, South America, India, you know, and bring them to the Holy Land to save the Jewish nature of the state. So that's their argument. So, you know, if you went to Israel and you met two people and asked them this question, you will get three opinions. Yeah. Two Jewish people, three political parties. Yeah.
Is it common in the past that non-Jewish men marry with Jewish ladies? Because according to my understanding, someone is Jewish if their mother are Jews and not the father. So is it common for some men which become a prominent man or successful man then get a Jewish lady? Then that's why Jews are so successful.
Well, I give you two examples. The daughter of Mr. Donald Trump, the daughter of Bill Clinton, both of them marry a Jewish man. Then they convert, so their children are Jewish. So, but you're quite right. The mother must be Jewish. So if a Jewish man marries a Jewish non-Jewish lady, she must convert, and then the child will be Jewish. Yeah, you're right.
How about non-Jewish men marry the Jewish lady? Is it very common in the past? What I want to ask.
Well, among the Jewish people, there are many different communities. Some are very strict, you know, and the children can only marry other Jewish people. The families insist on this, but then other Jewish people are more liberal, more secular, and then they allow the children to decide who, and they may marry a non-Jewish, and then there is the problem, because the non-Jewish person, do they choose to convert or not? Because converting to Judaism is quite difficult. In Shanghai, I interviewed an American man, and he married a lady from Anhui, and they had 2 children. So I said, "Are your children Jewish?" And he said, "For them to be Jewish, my wife had to convert. My Anhui wife had to convert." And this took 5 years. 5 years. She had to do a lot of study. She had to learn Hebrew. She had to learn the Jewish culture and tradition. She had to respect the Jewish dietary rules, which you know are very strict. So he said when we went back to Anhui to see her parents, can you believe this? They cannot eat at the same table because, you know, Chinese people like 猪肉. So the parents are eating their pork noodles, and the daughter and husband are in the same room but another table. You know, so he said, for my wife, it was very difficult to do this process, but she did it in the end. So now she is become Jewish, and the two children are Jewish. And because the first child was born when she was not Jewish, the son had to be given a special ceremony, and they have what is called a ritual bath, mikvah, and you have to be put in the mikvah, and you have to be completely inside the water. So the little boy, he was 2. Can you imagine? He was put in the mikvah, but you have to press his head. The rabbi pushed the poor boy under the water. And so he said, for about a year, my son would not go near water or swimming pool, or it was terrible. So, but this man is very serious about being Jewish. So, you know, they're a 100% Jewish family, but of course, in many other cases, the family are not so strict, and therefore the religious right begin to decline. Yeah.
So may I ask, are you single or married? Or divorced? Any other questions?
So Mark, I must thank you for your very informative and interesting talk. I have 2 questions to raise. The first one is, am I right to say that the Japanese and the Jews have a closed-door policy because it's very difficult to be converted to the local people, very complicated procedures. The second question is, do you have any perspective on the future relationship of the Jews and the Chinese? Thank you very much.
Well, you're quite right. Judaism does not encourage conversion. They don't want to convert people, which is quite different from the Christians. So when I ask a rabbi about this point, he will say, you can convert if you wish, but the first time you ask, can I convert, he will say no. Then you ask a second time, he will say no. Then you ask a third time, he said okay. And then he will give you a lot of procedures, a lot of study you have to do, and he make it as difficult as possible. So in other words, if you are 300% serious, you know, then you can convert, but it's not at all proselytizing. And this is why actually it is very attractive to the PRC government, because the PRC government is very suspicious of the Protestants, the Catholics, the Islam, because these are proselytizing religions. They want to extend the reach among the Chinese population, but the Jews don't want to. So relations between the Jewish communities in China and the PRC government are very good because there is no tension on this point. What is the outlook? I would say politically, diplomatically, I don't see any progress. I don't think China will use any diplomatic materials or efforts to try to make peace treaty between the Arabs and the Jews, no. But I think in many other fields, I think the cooperation will expand. China has enormous manufacturing capacity. It has enormous amount of capital. Israel has enormous brain power. It has so many startups, so many smart people with many good projects. So that's what's happening at the moment. Chinese companies are going to Israel and are investing in these Israeli startups, like Mr. Lee did. And I think there will be a great development in this area. Many Chinese companies are in Israel also doing big investment projects, ports, railways, roads, and so forth. I think this will continue. When I was in Shanghai, there was a terrorist attack in Jerusalem, and 2 Chinese workers in Israel were killed. and we discovered that these 2 workers were illegals. So the Chinese embassy in Jerusalem paid no attention to them. You know, they came here legally, we don't deal with them. But the Israeli government was very moved, you know, because they feel the victims of terrorist attacks are our responsibility, and these are foreigners in our country, and they were killed, so we're responsible for them. So when the 2 bodies were flown from Ben Gurion Airport, 2 members of the Israeli cabinet went to the airport to see the coffins put in the plane, and there were nobody there from Chinese embassy. And the plane flew to Fuzhou Airport, it arrived at 3 a.m., and the families of the dead people were there. And there was a man from Israeli embassy in Beijing. He went there at 3 in the morning to meet the coffins, and he went to the funeral. I mean, he told me all this story. And because you are the victim of a terrorist attack in Israel, your widow is entitled to a payment until she dies. And your children are entitled to money for education until they reach the age of 18. So, I mean, if I may say this, it's not a very pleasant thing to say, but the family of these 2 men benefited greatly more economically from what happened than if their husbands had remained alive and just continued to work. So the Chinese people working in Israel now, they are now at a higher level. There are much fewer of these illegal workers. They are legal workers, they are working in high-tech companies, in law firms, in management positions. So I think the cooperation will only improve.
So you mean the children of these 2 illegal workers who died in Israel are being looked after by the Israeli government
yes,
now?
And the families are receiving every month a payment from the Israeli government.
You should talk to Donald Trump then.
So I read on some social media in China, he said, why is it the Israeli government cares more for our people than our government? That was written on the social media.
This is incredible. Right?
with the eminent professor from Shanghai, Professor Wang. So that also lighted me up because I am from Hangzhou and based at the education. Most of the time I'm confused because sometimes we give them part of the fact and sometimes most of them mixed up with opinions. So this is the very confusing for younger generation when they are learning some historical histories. So I mean in mainland China. So during all of your past experiences and all your interviews with most your books about history, which of the facts that touched you or give you the most impression, and what's your opinion about the facts that touched you or?
Well, you know, in Shanghai, they have a special institute for research of Jewish affairs. So I must pay tribute to this institute, especially its head, Professor Pang Guang, and he's written many excellent books, published many papers. I interviewed him several times in Shanghai. So there's much good information in these books and these papers. And Professor Pan and Professor Wang are very learned people, and I greatly respect them. But just as Lao She said, there are limits. There are things that they cannot say. So I think it is our job as writers, historians, to take as much as we can from them, but realize there are some things that they cannot say. And then we must look to Israel or look to somewhere else to try to fill in the gaps, or perhaps go to Japan and speak to some Japanese professors, you know, for instance, in Taiwan now there is, I think it's called 读书人出版社, And they specialize in publishing translations of Japanese professors' books on Chinese history. So this is very interesting, because of course their perspective is completely different to that of PRC. And because, you know, in Taiwan, they have a great feeling for Japan and great respect for Japan. So this Chu Banshe is very much interested to present these points of view. So I think, yeah, this is what we should do. We should try to get information from all the different aspects. As you say, try to find out what is true and get out what is false, and then put it in our books for you to read. And in Hong Kong, we can do this. You know, when we go on the internet, we can go to any website. I mean, in mainland, you can't. But here, for the moment, we still can. Yeah.
Thank you.
读历史要听不同的人说的话，不要只读中国的人那个说的版本，听听日本人怎么讲，德国人、犹太人怎么讲。等于像这个法庭啊，你不能够听控方律师怎么讲，也要听听辩方的律师怎么讲。到最后，这个陪审团再看证据，才能够自己来下一个有罪无罪的决定，不能说只听一边。尤其是这边说的话，以前这么多年证实不是太可靠，啊，不等于他说他这一次说假话，不一定，但是多听听其他人说的，这是最需要的。OK？Any other question？ 那一位，嗰位係咪你啊？係啊。我哋仲有10分鐘，5至10分鐘。
Okay, Mr. O'Neill, thank you for inviting us to attend your talk. And thank you for the chocolate. It's a very informative seminar, and thank you very much. Just want to know about those 5 girls from Shanghai. What do they do in Israel later?
Well, they are sponsored by Shanghai, this NGO which wants to rescue the lost Jews around the world. And do you know the Jewish diaspora is very wealthy, and many Jewish people outside of Israel are very willing to donate money for many different kind of causes in Israel. And some are willing to donate money to Shanghai. So these people have nothing to worry about in their early years. I think for their school fees, for the living fees, they would be provided for. But I think after they graduate, after they are accepted as Israeli citizens and as Jews, then they would be expected to earn their own living and make their own way. But from my understanding of these 5, they are talented, they are well-educated women, they are extremely motivated, as you can imagine, to get from Kaifeng to Israel. So I think they will have no difficulty to find work. I mean, they already had skills in China before they went there, and they will have been in this education institute there in Israel. They will be even more educated. So I think they will have no difficulty to find work and have a good life there. And once they're Jews, of course, they're ladies, so their children will be Jewish. So they will make very good wives for people, even for Gentile like me, you know. Yeah.
Another question is, what do you think about the worldwide some strategic military position? What's the Jews or the Israel they will position themselves in this?
Well, I think ever since 1948, the strategic position of Israel is never easy, because the Arab countries and the Arab populations, most of them have not accepted the fact that Israel have right to exist. And Iran's leaders have said many times that Israel must be wiped out. You know, they've said it. So Israel spends a huge percentage of its GDP on defense and the situation is not really improving. I mean, they have a peace treaty with Jordan and with Egypt. They have diplomatic relations with these two governments, but that doesn't mean there is good people-to-people relation. I think not many Egyptians, not many Jordanians are willing to go to Israel for holidays. You know, if Israelis go to these two countries, they have to be quite careful. Probably they mustn't wear anything which suggests they're Jewish. So, you know, a lot more needs to be done. Whereas if you're a Jewish person living in United States or in the UK or in Hong Kong or in Shanghai, you know, of course your life is much safer, much more secure. But life in Israel, I think, is never easy. Yeah.
But then, what is the attraction for like second generation Jews who live elsewhere in the world to go back to Israel, especially if they're not born there? They don't have a root, like you're settled in the foreign place already. What makes them to go back?
Well, this is a very good question. Of course, if you are living in Los Angeles, in New York, in Chicago, you are born to a prosperous Jewish family. You know, you are a lawyer, you're in finance, you're an engineer. I think you would visit Israel for holidays. You would maybe go for kibbutz for summer. But you're right, I don't think that person would have any reason to want to immigrate. And also, of course, Israelis are very highly skilled. They have a good passport. So it's quite easy for them to emigrate if they want. They can get jobs in Europe or United States. But I think the answer is that Israel is the homeland for any Jews. So let's take example of France. France has the biggest Jewish population in Europe. It's about 400,000. And the last 10 years, 10% of the French Jewish population has emigrated to Israel. Now, why is that? Why do you think?
Growing population of Muslims.
Yeah, well, two reasons. One is the attacks by jihadis in France. Many cases, targeting Jews in particular, Jewish schools, Jewish synagogues. Recently, a retired Jewish lady, a survivor of the Holocaust, was sitting at home in her apartment in Paris, and she was killed by a Muslim, a black Muslim. That's one reason. The other is the anti-Semitism among sections of the French population, I mean, mainly from the Muslim ones. So this is not an attack with a dagger or a gun, but it's demonstrations, protests, and so on. So in other words, these French Jewish people felt that although Israel is not a very secure place, it is at risk of war, but still we feel more comfortable there than we do living in France. So to answer your question, I think Jews abroad who have a very comfortable and a good life, they don't want to immigrate to Israel. But there are always Jews in certain countries who are living in difficult circumstances, facing persecution and danger, and for them Israel is attractive.
Okay, one last question from the gentleman.
我想请问两位，就是犹太人是优秀的民族，可是为什么有这么多的笑话是贬低犹太人？我举两个最简单的例子。第一个是人家问为什么犹太人的鼻子特别大，他们的回答就是说，因为空气是免费的。第二个就是说，为什么犹太人在沙漠流浪了40年？他们的答案是说，他们在寻找上帝不见了的银币。那么，请问两位可以简单的讲述一下，为什么犹太人给外面的印象是这么贬低？就是说，他们是放高利贷的，他们是对钱看得比他们的生命还要紧张。Thank you.
Big question. 这个因为2000年的历史了，最早是说这个犹太人在那个耶路撒冷是去要钉死耶稣的嘛。那个时候这个比拉多罗马总督说他无罪，但是那犹太的祭司说要那个判那个耶稣死刑。第二就是2000年他们 到处都在住的时候，他们要生存就要非常的聪明，要做生意什么。所以呢，2000年以来，在欧洲的文学，像莎士比亚那个威尼斯商人啊，还有那个他跟他同期的一个叫 Christopher Marlowe， 他写了一个叫 Jew of Malta， 马耳他的岛的这个犹太人，全部都把犹太人定型了。再加上他们住在一起 ghetto， 那么所以他们就是比较的可能居住的环境都比较穷，可以装一点。那个是2000年一种成见的，没有办法，对不对
？The answer they will give to your question is that the Europeans, we banned them from many businesses. They couldn't join the civil service, they couldn't be teachers, they couldn't be in the army. So they cannot be farmers, they cannot own land. So they can only do a few professions. The professions they do are the ones that we, I mean the whites, the Christians, don't want to do. So, of course, money lending is an important one. So then they lend money, they make money from lending money, and then we criticize them for doing this. But they only do it because we don't give them the choice. But just on the question of the jokes, one of the pleasures of this book is that Jewish people are very excellent at jokes too. If there was a gold medal for the jokes, I think I would. Last year I would give it to the Irish for the jokes, but I've decided no, Irish silver medal. I'm afraid. So can I give you one example? This is from a rabbi. You know, President Trump recently went to Jerusalem, and like other heads of state, you must go to the wall of lamentations. You must put on the kippah. You must write a note and put it between the stones. So Mr. Trump left, and one of the staff came out and took the note and read it. And what did President Trump say? Who built this wall and who paid for it? So what I suggest is that the Jewish jokes you are telling me were probably invented by rabbis, actually. So this, I think, is a very good quality. You laugh at yourself. I think this is a kind of humility.
有一本书是犹太人笑话集，我见过是英文写的，专门他们自己写的，非常很刻薄的，比那个英国人的笑话还要刻薄，很刁钻。Okay. Well, thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Coming up with a book every year. Don't underestimate your influence since the presentation of the book on Robert Hart last year. I have noticed the frequency of mentioning the word Robert Hart in the past year on Chinese internet has risen so much. Especially, it is being suggested that if President Xi had Robert Hart to look after the Shanghai and Guangzhou and Beijing customs, and if he had Robert Hart to be his number 2 man instead of Wang Qishan, 中国的贪污就没有问题，统统解决问题 ，right? It was your influence. Thank you very much. 明天呢，我後天還有2場是在這裡，我係主持。聽日仲有一位咧喺第二間房咧，係一位法國嘅歷史小説家，佢叫做 Chantal Thomas。佢今年60幾歲，佢寫呢本小説咧係叫做法國皇后瑪麗安東尼喺7月14日1789年巴士的監獄被攻陷嘅嗰3日喺個凡爾賽宮裏邊嘅處境都係咧非常精彩，因為我好中意 moderate 嗰啲，我喜歡 moderate with best good writers picking up rare subjects, right? Mark being one of them. I think this French lady, French woman writer being another one, right? 所以聽日咧同埋後日仲有2位，一位咧係馬來西亞華人，同埋另外一個咧係英國嘅，都係哇係嗰啲文學嘅題材都係好稀少，係嘛？青年文學睇而家嘅英國嘅 class system， 同埋咧。Movies, Malay myths, and local monsters. And of course, there are many, many other good programs under the TDC Book Fair. Thank you very much.